Howdy, partner. My name is Mike Webb. I'm running for Arlington County School Board. I'm just a simple city slicker turned urban cowboy and the son of a preacher man born to a limited degree. We've got some smart folks at Free the Mind Productions. They put together this little video. So just saddle up, put on your thinking cap, put your feet in the stirrup, and hang on for a good ride as we go on to make an education precedent. Giddy up. Yippee-ki-yay.
In July of 2016, during the highly contested presidential elections, with the theme Our Lives Matter, the NAACP resolved at its annual national convention in Cincinnati to demand a moratorium on public charter schools. And almost immediately, liberal special interests from teachers' unions to newspapers like the Huffington Post heralded the decision as a challenge to the Trump agenda on civil rights and described it as an evil attempt to defund public schools. But no one ever stopped to ask the question as to whether defunding public schools was a concession of necessity, because for almost 150 years, public schools have failed tragically to educate the most abject populations in the United States, and particularly children of color. American public education of the least advantaged youth is so poor that we as a nation rise only slightly above the success of Mexico at educating its most oppressed population, despite an exorbitant expenditure that dwarfs the education allocation of our southern neighbor. And in a college-level course on economics, defunding a failed but revered peculiar institution of public education is simply an opportunity cost invested in the academic achievement and success of our children. Which is more important, brick and mortar buildings or your kids? The life of persons of color in America in public education has not been a crystal stair, to use the words. Under slave codes of an era of chattel slavery in America, African slaves and their progeny were not even permitted to read. And the enduring legacy of that still and stark red mark in history rests in the dark sub-basement shadows of the National Museum of African American History, a part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where the Bible captured in the hands of the insurrectionary Nat Turner sits behind glass with an open page set so far back that no one can read it today, even with a zoom lens on a pocket digital device. And that holy book was gifted to that national treasure and archive of a people's journey making history, not by his surviving family and descendants, but by the family of his slave masters who had kept it for themselves for almost 200 years, with not one thought of finding the rightful next of kin. Just think about that for a moment. Just think about that. At the conclusion of the Civil War, education of newly freed slaves became a priority for a path to full citizenship by the federal government in the executive and legislative branches, predominantly from a party of emancipation and a mandatory condition for Reconstruction reentry into the Union for the former Confederate states was to establish a quality education for their former slaves. But in the post-bellum South, quality was defined by Dixiecrats as separate but equal, in accordance with the decree of the highest court in the land in the case Plessy versus Ferguson. And just in a suburb of the nation's capital, the predominantly African-American First Baptist Church of Vienna sits today just across the street from a formerly segregated high school for blacks in an affluent neighborhood today predominantly white. After the end of World War II, civil unrest began to mount among persons of color for gains in civil rights for which they had fought in the Great War. And the battlefield became the classrooms of education, rising to a summit with the decree of the United States Supreme Court in Brown v. Board of Education. Finally, a third-grade girl of color named Linda, only coincidentally the Spanish word for pretty, who once took a bus to a substandard segregated school, might be able to attend an integrated, or at least desegregated, schoolhouse, where sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners might sit down together around a table of brotherhood, as soon as local school boards might manage to proceed with all deliberate speed. One African American man, looking back on a recent anniversary of that momentous decree on public television, noted that his formerly all-black substandard high school was magically transformed overnight, even replacing the dirt paved one, but only after it was decided by the provincial local authority that that school would be integrated for children. And over 60 years after the landmark Brown decision on desegregation in public education, over 50% of the nation's public schools, despite ever-increasing budgets and pious promises to continuously strive to eliminate the achievement gap, are underperforming in their basic mission, or as Chief Justice Earl Warren described in the Brown decision, as perhaps the most important function of state and local government. Over 60 years after Brown, over 50% of our nation's children attending public schools cannot read, write, or perform arithmetic at grade level. And over 60 years after the Brown decree, over 50% of our nation's children who matriculate in our nation's colleges succeed in graduating in under 6 years. And most of those affected are without question of doubt our children of color, nationally afflicted with an achievement gap generally attributed to economic disadvantage. Yet, no matter how you read those tragic facts, that is not a success story for public education in a land called America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is a strongly held conviction. Black Legislative Caucus in the Commonwealth, where once the capital of the Confederate States of America found its home, that public charter schools began as a way to create state-funded sanctuaries for, quote, white folks, unquote. But that was then, and this is now. Even the great 14th Amendment, under which every major civil rights decision by our nation's courts and our highest court of the land were decided, found initial use to defend the rights of fictitious persons known as corporations, not whole persons formerly counted as 3/5 for purposes of representation, bought and sold as commodities in a grand slave trade. Moreover, what is the evidentiary basis for the conclusion that the jury is still out on the success of public charter schools? There have been exactly 15 undisputable studies on the public charter schools in America, and 13 found that public charter schools do a far better job at raising educational achievement levels, and the remaining 2 found them on par with the local public school district under study. There is one public charter school in California where, despite the personal attacks against the founder, that has in fact been recognized to have raised the level of educational achievement of Native Americans, the most abject minority population in America, so high that they outperform every school and student in the Golden Gate State. And the only conclusion that can be drawn when an organization runs against the weight of evidence is that somebody rigged the game and is betting against our kids, even if we scream Black Lives Matter or Our Lives Matter until we are all blue in the face. A priori, it has been found in resolution, whereas phraseology, that public charter schools are not a perfect solution. So the NAACP has resolved to tell colored kids to wait and fester in the public schools that they have supported since 1909, which are also far from perfect as substantiated by incontrovertible evidence. But the simple fact of the matter is that there are no perfect solutions on this side of heaven. And as John F. Kennedy so eloquently said in address, God's work on earth must truly be our own, because the Lord helps those who help themselves. Let Sister Whitney sing soulfully, I believe the children are our future, while colored folk clap their hands, stomp their feet, and shake their booties in spirit-filled bliss. But Houston, we have a problem. And even if we are the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known by initials of NAACP, we cannot address that problem like we do everything else on CP time. Not when our kids, their lives, their future livelihoods, their dreams, their aspirations, and their futures are at stake. As preachers say in the pulpit, let's bring this in. Let's deliver a message from on Mount Sinai to your home address. So listen up. Far more than an African slave trade over a Middle Passage. Far more than auctioneer blocks, whipping posts, separations of families, destruction of heritage, and slave codes. Far more than Jim Crow laws, lynching, and lips dripping with words of interposition and nullification by a governor standing in a schoolhouse door. Far more than perpetuated stereotypes on television and in film, inequities in the administration of justice, and every ill perceived to be attributed to race today, the persisting and intractable achievement gap of persons of color in America is the most pernicious evil because it substantiates in evidentiary record all of those tragedies that have been endured on a people's journey making history. Its scarlet stigma attaches to every exception to the rule and everyone else to a demographic statistical measure. It presents a case of first impression at every chance meeting or planned meeting between persons of color and those in a majority culture that will always be the last. And join hands, march, sing, and pray. But with its continued and unabated existence, we shall not overcome on any day. We, as a people of color, and in a matter of record, cannot and must not continue to graduate to a lesser degree. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I earned my majority as an Army Ranger, where Rangers lead the way. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just imagine that. Honest, Analyzed by Mike Webb.
Honest.
Hope you enjoyed that little piece. Hope you learned something too. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out at mytrueconservative.com. If you want to contact me, give me an email at givefaithatry@gmail.com. Until next time, remember, mind the gap. And Rangers, lead the way. Just imagine that.